I was originally planning to cover multiple cases in this video as usual, but as I started researching, I quickly realized there was just too much to this story to condense it. It had to stand alone. There are so many layers to this case, and the deeper I went, the more shocking it became. Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who has subscribed, liked, and commented on my videos. I truly appreciate all of your support. I don't want to interrupt the story once we get started, so if you enjoy these cases or this kind of content, don't be afraid to hit that thumbs up button. It really helps me out. Now let's get into it. In November 2011, the Martin family in Garland, Texas was full of holiday cheer. Kelly Martin, 54, and her husband Don were busy decorating their home for the festive season, a tradition they loved. Don, a dedicated police officer, and Kelly, a caring teacher, had been happily married since their college years. Together, they had raised two daughters, Lauren and Caitlin, and built a life rooted in love and devotion. As Kelly climbed up to retrieve boxes from the attic, she missed a step on the ladder and fell. It was a momentary stumble, but it sent a sharp pain shooting through her back. At first, Kelly assumed it was nothing serious, a strained muscle perhaps, but as the holidays passed, the pain lingered and worsened. By early 2012, Kelly realized she couldn't just wait it out. A trip to her doctor revealed she had a herniated disc in her back, an injury that wouldn't heal on its own. Physical therapy and medications offered little relief, and eventually her doctor referred her to a highly recommended neurosurgeon who had recently moved to the area, Dr. Duntsch. Dr. Duntsch came with glowing reviews and an air of confidence that immediately put Kelly and Don at ease. He assured them that her surgery would be a breeze, calling it one of the simplest procedures a neurosurgeon can perform. It was expected to take no more than 45 minutes. Kelly, ever the pragmatist, asked him directly, "Have you ever had any bad outcomes or deaths in your surgeries?" "No," Duntsch replied, knocking on the wooden desk for effect. Feeling reassured, Kelly scheduled the operation for March 2012. On the day of the surgery, Don sat in the waiting room, watching the clock and expecting a brief procedure. But 45 minutes passed, then an hour, then 90 minutes. Don's anxiety grew with every tick of the clock. When nearly 2 hours had passed, he asked a nurse for an update. After some time, Dr. Duntsch finally emerged. He explained that the surgery had taken longer than expected, but claimed it was a success. Kelly was experiencing significant pain, he said, so they had increased her medication. She might need to stay in the ICU overnight, but Duntsch assured Don that she would be fine. However, Don wasn't allowed to see his wife yet. The staff told him they were still working on her, a phrase that sent a chill down his spine. "I just knew something was wrong," Don later recalled. Trusting his gut, he called his daughters, Lauren and Caitlin, and urged them to come to the hospital. Hours dragged on, and Don's concern turned to dread. Finally, he spotted the ICU physician, the anesthesiologist, and Dr. Duntsch approaching. Their somber expressions said everything. "We did everything we could," the ICU physician told them. Kelly Martin was gone. The shock was unimaginable. Don described the moment as pure misery, saying, "My world ended right then and there." Lauren and Caitlin were frozen in disbelief. Caitlin described the scene as if it were happening in slow motion, the crushing finality of the words sinking in. Don asked for scissors to cut a small lock of Kelly's hair to keep as a memento. Then the family drove home in silence, their grief too profound for words. The medical examiner later determined that Kelly had died from internal bleeding caused by a severed artery during the procedure. It was a devastating revelation, but it raised even more questions. How could such a routine surgery have gone so horribly wrong? Don, Lauren, and Caitlin couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from them. They felt strongly that there was more to the story, a suspicion that would prove tragically correct. To understand what went wrong in Kelly's surgery, one must look back at the man behind the scalpel. Born in Montana in 1971, Christopher Daniel Duntsch initially pursued a career in football. Though he had dreams of playing professionally, his performance on the field was lackluster. Teammates described him as someone who struggled with basic drills and following instructions, but admired his relentless determination to improve. When repeated transfers between schools led to his ineligibility to play professionally, Duntsch abandoned his football aspirations and made an abrupt career pivot. Medicine became his new goal. In 1995, Duntsch earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Memphis, followed by a medical degree. Academically, he thrived, earning a spot in the prestigious Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. He also worked with Russian scientists on cutting-edge research projects, securing millions in funding. Duntsch began his surgical residency at the University of Tennessee, quickly gaining a reputation as a confident and charismatic rising star. His glowing 12-page resume painted a picture of excellence, and many believed he was destined for greatness. But behind the carefully constructed image, cracks began to appear. Duntsch's resume was riddled with exaggerations and outright lies. He claimed to have earned a doctorate in microbiology from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, a program that didn't exist. He also listed a PhD from the University of Tennessee Health Center, but his name was absent from university records and yearbooks. Even more troubling was his escalating substance abuse. Duntsch had experimented with drugs in college, but during his residency, his habits spiraled out of control. Colleagues later described his routine. Mornings began with a vodka and orange juice, followed by a line of cocaine. Throughout the day, he supplemented this with OxyContin, Xanax, and other drugs. Duntsch's ex-girlfriend, Megan, recalled a particularly horrifying moment. After an all-night binge of cocaine and vodka, Duntsch grabbed his scrubs and headed to work, ready to meet with patients as if nothing had happened. He joked about his drug use with colleagues, referring to cocaine as his neurostimulants, claiming it made him sharper in the operating room. But the reality was far more sinister. Despite mounting concerns from those around him, Duntsch's charisma and relentless ambition shielded him from scrutiny. He continued to rise through the ranks, leaving a trail of red flags in his wake. The truth behind Dr. Christopher Duntsch's career is shocking, but even more disturbing is how long it took to uncover it. His drug abuse, arrogance, and incompetence all contributed to countless lives being devastated. Let's go back to the early days of his spiraling downfall. It was a party that seemed endless, filled with LSD, cocaine, and pills. When asked how long the drug binge lasted, one participant admitted, all night till the next day, well past sunrise. But the most disturbing part? Christopher Duntsch, the host of this drug-fueled marathon, walked straight into work afterward, without sleep, still under the influence. When complaints of his behavior began to pile up, Duntsch was ordered to take a drug test. He refused. As a result, he was sent to an impaired physician program, which was supposed to evaluate and rehabilitate doctors struggling with substance abuse. Yet, even after this, his career moved forward. In a deposition years later, his arrogance and disregard for accountability became glaringly obvious. When questioned about operating on patients while under the influence of cocaine, Duntsch repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right. Have you ever been under the influence of cocaine while treating a patient? I take the Fifth. While performing surgery? I take the Fifth. Over and over, he refused to answer. Shockingly, despite multiple complaints, a refusal to take drug tests, and a history of substance abuse, Duntsch was still allowed to complete his residency. He performed fewer than 100 surgeries, far below the typical requirement of 1,000. Yet, in 2011, he was recruited to join the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute in North Dallas with a $600,000 advance, a testament to how much hospitals value surgeons for the revenue they generate. Shortly after, Baylor Regional Medical Center in Plano offered him operating privileges, paying him a staggering $50,000 a month. A glowing recommendation accompanied him. Chris is extremely bright and possibly the hardest working person I have ever met, it read. He has an excellent work ethic. But not everyone was fooled. Dr. Randall Kirby, a seasoned vascular surgeon, met Duntsch early in his Texas career. Their first conversation left Kirby stunned. Duntsch declared himself the best surgeon in Dallas and the only one patients could trust. "I'm here to clean up this town," he boasted, his tone dripping with arrogance. Kirby found his attitude troubling, given Duntsch's lack of experience, but dismissed it as youthful overconfidence. Soon, though, that cocky exterior would be revealed as something far more dangerous. At the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute, Duntsch performed only one surgery before being asked to leave. After the operation, he jetted off to Las Vegas, abandoning his patient in distress without any post-operative care. His drug use was becoming more evident. Duntsch's behavior extended to bizarre and rambling emails, often sent while he was intoxicated. One email to his ex-girlfriend and surgical assistant, Kimberly Morgan, read, "I really am building an empire. Everyone close to me thinks I'm something between God, Einstein, and the Antichrist. I'm ready to leave the love and kindness behind and become a cold-blooded killer." His emails referenced heavy drinking and drug use and were filled with profanity, delusions of grandeur, and erratic threats. They revealed a man spiraling further into instability. By late 2011, Duntsch was performing surgeries in North Texas. His first patient, Ken Fennell, underwent back surgery to alleviate chronic pain. However, Duntsch operated on the wrong part of Ken's spine, a mistake he acknowledged but promised to correct with a second surgery. Desperate for relief, Ken agreed. After the second operation, Ken woke up to excruciating pain, describing his legs as feeling like they were on fire. Instead of relief, he was left reliant on a motorized wheelchair. Then came Lee Passmore, an investigator for the Collin County Medical Examiner's Office. Lee sought surgery after his back pain returned, and his pain specialist recommended Duntsch. The procedure was booked quickly, with vascular surgeon Dr. Mark Hoy assisting. During the operation, Hoy watched in horror as Duntsch cut into a ligament surrounding Lee's spinal cord, a structure that should never be touched. Blood began pooling rapidly, transforming the operating room into what Hoy later described as a lake of red. Hoy attempted to intervene, blocking Duntsch from continuing and warning, "We need to talk about this. That's dangerous. I've never seen this done before." But Duntsch dismissed him, his arrogance unshaken. Unable to continue watching, Hoy walked out, vowing never to work with him again. Lee survived but was left with permanent nerve damage. He now struggles to walk and suffers from chronic pain. Next was Barry Morgoloff, a truck driver whose years of heavy lifting had left him in agony. Initially hesitant about surgery, Barry researched Duntsch extensively, reading his glowing reviews and impressive, but fabricated, accolades. Convinced, he scheduled an operation. Duntsch's charisma won Barry over. He was so confident, charming even, a family man. "He made me feel safe," Barry recalled. Assisting in the operation was none other than Dr. Randall Kirby. The procedure, described as one of the simplest in spinal surgery, quickly descended into chaos. Dr. Christopher Duntsch's shocking incompetence and arrogance came to light during a surgery that would change the life of Barry Morgoloff forever. Vascular surgeon Dr. Randall Kirby assisted Duntsch during the procedure, but he quickly noticed alarming issues. Duntsch bypassed proper tools, grabbed at structures he shouldn't have been near, and moved through the surgery with reckless abandon. Concerned, Kirby attempted to intervene, politely offering to take over the procedure. But Duntsch, full of unwarranted confidence, refused. Kirby eventually left the operating room, unable to watch the disaster unfold. The feeling he'd had since meeting Duntsch, that something was deeply wrong, intensified. Barry woke up from surgery in unbearable pain, worse than anything he had felt before. It was later discovered that fragments of bone had been left in his spinal canal. Another surgeon attempted to repair the damage, but the injury was irreversible. Barry now relies on a cane to walk, and his doctor has warned that he may eventually end up in a wheelchair. At one point, Barry became so depressed and overwhelmed by his physical and mental anguish that he considered taking his own life. Thankfully, the love and support of his wife and children helped pull him back from the brink, and Barry began intensive therapy to manage the aftermath of his failed surgery. The next patient to fall victim to Duntsch's incompetence was Jerry Summers, his childhood friend and, at the time, roommate. Jerry suffered from a herniated disc, and trusting his longtime friend, turned to Duntsch for surgery. Given their history, Jerry didn't hesitate to ask for help. Duntsch constantly bragged about his abilities and his popularity as a surgeon, which reassured Jerry that he was in capable hands. What should have been a straightforward operation became a nightmare. During the procedure, Duntsch severed Jerry's vertebral artery, causing uncontrollable bleeding. Jerry lost nearly 2 liters of blood. In a desperate attempt to stop the hemorrhaging, Duntsch packed the area with so much anticoagulant material that it compressed Jerry's spinal cord. When Jerry woke up, he couldn't feel his arms or legs. He was completely paralyzed and required 24/7 care for the rest of his life. Devastated and hopeless, Jerry told his girlfriend from his ICU bed, "Kill me, I want to die." Shockingly, Duntsch never visited Jerry in the hospital, nor did he offer any explanation for what went wrong. Enraged, Jerry told nurses that Duntsch had been using cocaine the night before the surgery. While he later admitted that he made up the claim, it wasn't an unreasonable assumption given Duntsch's well-known history of drug use. The accusation prompted an order for Duntsch to take a drug test. However, Duntsch avoided taking the test, claiming he got lost on the way to the facility. Despite this, he managed to pass a separate psychological evaluation. Astonishingly, within 3 weeks, he was allowed to resume practicing medicine, albeit restricted to minor procedures. Shortly after, Kelly Martin became his next patient. Following Kelly's tragic death, Duntsch was ordered to take another drug test. This time, he complied. The first screening indicated that the sample had been diluted with water, raising suspicions. A follow-up test taken days later came back clean. Meanwhile, Lee Passmore, still struggling after his own disastrous surgery with Duntsch, left his job at the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. Before his departure, a fax landed on his desk that stopped him cold. The document listed 2 names, Kelly Martin and Dr. Christopher Duntsch. As Lee read the details of Kelly's case, he realized the similarities to his own experience. Determined to uncover the truth, Lee began digging into Duntsch's background. He discovered gaps in Duntsch's educational history that raised red flags. You don't just walk away from 2 or 3 years of medical training during a residency and pick back up where you left off, Lee said. That's not how it works. His investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Hospital administrators reviewed Duntsch's cases and confirmed what Lee had feared: botched surgeries, patient harm, and now, a death. The evidence was undeniable. However, instead of firing Duntsch, Baylor Regional Medical Center in Plano asked him to resign. To protect themselves from potential lawsuits and bad press, the hospital allowed him to leave in good standing. A letter stated, "All areas of concern about Dr. Christopher Duntsch have been closed as of this date. There have been no summary or administrative restrictions or suspensions of Duntsch's medical staff membership or clinical privileges during the time he has practiced at Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano." This decision shielded the hospital from reporting Duntsch to the National Practitioner Databank, a federal database intended to warn employers about problematic doctors, nor did they report him to the Texas Medical Board. When some of Duntsch's patients attempted to sue him for malpractice, they faced another hurdle. Tort reform laws enacted in 2003 had made it difficult for victims to win damages in Texas. These laws reduced payouts and deterred attorneys from taking malpractice cases, leaving many victims without legal recourse. In July 2012, Duntsch moved to the Dallas Medical Center. The hospital ran a cursory background check, which came back clean, allowing him to continue operating. The trail of devastation he left behind was far from over. In the same month, Christopher Duntsch joined Dallas Medical Center. He performed surgery on 63-year-old Floella Brown, a banker who had spent her career building toward a well-earned retirement. She was eager to put her persistent back pain behind her and looked forward to a future free from discomfort. What should have been a routine procedure, however, soon spiraled into a catastrophe. Roughly 30 minutes into the operation, Duntsch encountered excessive bleeding and began muttering, "Why is it still bleeding?" over and over, clearly panicking. The surgical staff grew increasingly concerned. watching as he fumbled his way through the procedure. Although the bleeding eventually slowed, the damage had already been done. At first, Floella seemed to recover. She woke up from surgery and showed no immediate signs of distress. But in the early hours of the following morning, she suddenly lost consciousness. Pressure was inexplicably building in her brain, and despite doctors' desperate efforts, her condition deteriorated rapidly. She was rushed to the ICU, where specialists fought to save her life, but they couldn't determine the exact cause of her sudden decline. While Floella lay in a coma in intensive care, unaware of the battle being waged to save her, Duntsch moved on to his next patient, or should I say victim. 71-year-old Mary Efford, a woman full of energy and a love for life. Mary had remained active well into her 70s, but chronic back pain had begun to slow her down. She hoped surgery would restore her mobility and improve her quality of life. As Duntsch entered the operating room, the nurses immediately noticed something deeply unsettling. There was a large hole in the back of his scrubs, revealing that he wasn't wearing underwear. Nurse Kyle Kissinger recalled seeing him wear the same scrubs for 3 consecutive days, confirming their worst suspicions. Duntsch wasn't even bothering to change between surgeries. When Kissinger looked at him closely, he spotted another alarming detail. Duntsch's pupils were pinpoints, and he barely blinked. He appeared completely unfocused and disoriented. Then, in the middle of Mary's surgery, Duntsch suddenly blurted out that he wanted to perform an emergency craniotomy, a procedure that involves cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain, on Floella. This statement stunned the medical staff. Floella had already been transferred to the ICU, and Dallas Medical Center didn't even have the necessary equipment to perform the procedure. Kissinger, along with other staff members, pushed back against the absurd suggestion. They reminded Duntsch that their hospital wasn't capable of handling such a complex brain operation and strongly urged him to abandon the idea. After some resistance, Duntsch finally relented, but by then, the damage to Floella had already been done. Floella was later transferred to another hospital, but she never regained consciousness. A few days later, her family was faced with an agonizing decision and ultimately withdrew her life support. A neurosurgeon reviewing her case later confirmed the horrific truth. Duntsch had placed a screw directly into her vertebral artery, cutting off blood flow and causing a massive stroke. Worse still, he had been operating in the entirely wrong area, meaning the surgery never even addressed the actual source of her pain. Meanwhile, Mary awoke from her surgery in unbearable pain. Something was terribly wrong. She couldn't move her legs or feel her toes. Dr. Robert Henderson, a highly regarded spinal surgeon with over 30 years of experience, was urgently called in to assess her case. When he reviewed her post-operative x-rays, he was appalled. "This is some kind of travesty," he recalled thinking. Henderson immediately scheduled Mary for corrective surgery. What he found inside her body was beyond comprehension. Duntsch had left 3 separate holes in her spinal column where he had failed to properly insert screws. One screw had directly impaled the nerves responsible for controlling her leg and bladder function. Most shockingly, Henderson discovered that Duntsch had inexplicably amputated one of her nerve roots, a move so reckless that Henderson was left questioning whether Duntsch was even a real surgeon. He couldn't think of any other logical explanation for such extreme incompetence. Mary now relies on a wheelchair for mobility and has never regained the use of her legs. One of her greatest passions, sewing, has become impossible. She can no longer lift her foot to operate a sewing machine. "Pain is really my life now," she admitted. Dr. Henderson, shaken by what he had uncovered, took his findings to the hospital administrators. Around the same time, he began sharing stories with Dr. Randall Kirby, another surgeon who had worked with Duntsch. The 2 doctors compared notes and realized they weren't alone. Wherever Duntsch had operated, he left a trail of botched surgeries, injured patients, and death. Dr. Kirby, who had privileges at over 60 hospitals across Texas, couldn't escape hearing horror stories about Duntsch. It seemed that everyone in the medical community had a cautionary tale to share. Finally, hospital officials at Dallas Medical Center decided Duntsch could no longer operate at their facility. However, like Baylor Regional Medical Center before them, they chose not to fire or suspend him. Instead, they allowed him to quietly resign, avoiding the legal entanglements of a potential wrongful termination lawsuit and the negative press that could follow. This decision meant they were not required to report Duntsch to the Texas Medical Board or the National Practitioner Data Bank, a federal system designed to warn hospitals about problematic physicians. As a result, Duntsch was free to continue operating elsewhere, leaving more devastation in his wake. Patients like Kelly Martin and Floella Brown had already paid the ultimate price, and others, like Mary Efford, were left permanently disabled. Yet the system that should have protected them failed at every turn. It wasn't until months later, after repeated catastrophic outcomes, that Duntsch was finally reported to the Texas Medical Board. But even then, the investigation dragged on for nearly a year, during which Duntsch continued to practice. The horrors didn't end there. In December 2012, Dr. Kirby was called to assist with a patient named Jacqueline Troy, who was battling a severe infection following neck surgery. When Kirby reviewed her records, he discovered that her vocal cords and one of her arteries had been severed during the procedure. Kirby immediately asked, "Was this a guy named Christopher Duntsch?" He already knew the answer. Duntsch was eventually reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank, but even after that, he managed to secure operating privileges at yet another hospital. He seemed unstoppable, but unbeknownst to him, his time was running out. His next patient, Jeff Glidewell, would mark the beginning of the end for Christopher Duntsch. Jeff was a rugged outdoorsman who loved adventure, but a motorcycle accident years earlier had left him with lingering back and neck pain. Determined to regain his quality of life, Jeff searched for a solution and came across an advertisement that seemed like the answer to his prayers. It featured Dr. Duntsch, described as one of the best neurosurgeons in Dallas, a man dedicated to changing lives 24 hours a day.
And hi again, everyone. Jim Knox along with Candace Kruger, and welcome back to another edition of the Best Docs Network, which of course features some of the best doctors in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Dr. Christopher Duntsch calls himself the best neurosurgeon in all of Dallas. He specializes in relieving back and neck pain.
Then they come back to me to discuss surgical options.
Reassured by the glowing claims, Jeff booked an appointment with the man he thought could finally help him. Little did he know, this decision would lead to yet another horrifying chapter in the story of Dr. Duntsch. Despite feeling hesitant, Jeff thought Duntsch's confident demeanor in the consultation and his supposed credentials made him the right choice. On the day of his surgery, however, Jeff's unease only grew. As a superstitious man, seeing 3 black cats cross his path on the way to the hospital unsettled him. He told his wife, Robin, he felt they should turn around, but Robin reassured him, and they continued to the hospital. His instincts, however, proved correct. The surgery was scheduled to begin hours earlier, but Duntsch didn't even show up until 3 hours past the start time. Arriving in a cab, he claimed a flat tire had delayed him. He looked anything but professional, sweaty, disheveled, and wearing frayed jeans. Jeff later recalled that Duntsch looked unprepared and far from ready to operate. His gut feeling screamed that something was wrong, but he kissed Robin goodbye and headed into surgery. Unbeknownst to Jeff, the Texas Medical Board had been investigating Duntsch for nearly a year at this point. Still, they had taken no action, and Duntsch was free to continue practicing. The surgery itself was another horrifying disaster. During the operation, Duntsch mistook part of Jeff's neck muscle for a tumor and abandoned the procedure halfway through. In the process, he cut into Jeff's vocal cords, punctured an artery, and created a hole in his esophagus. To stop the bleeding, Duntsch shoved a sponge into the wound and stitched Jeff up with the sponge still inside his body, a glaring violation of medical standards. After the operation, Duntsch approached Robin, telling her he had discovered a tumor and conducted a quick biopsy. Because of this, he said he couldn't complete the surgery. However, there had been no tumor and no biopsy was performed. Robin went to see Jeff in recovery, only to find him in severe distress. He was gasping for air, unable to swallow, and mumbling, "Where's the doctor? I can't move my arm or leg. Something's wrong. What did he do to me?" Robin flagged down Duntsch, who eventually appeared. When Jeff, now battling a life-threatening infection, told him he couldn't move his arms, Duntsch coldly replied, "Well, I don't know what to tell you about that," before walking away without offering further assistance or explanation. Horrified by the condition Jeff was left in, the hospital called Dr. Randall Kirby to assess the damage. Kirby, who had already witnessed Duntsch's recklessness with previous patients, could hardly believe what he was seeing. "This wasn't an operation, it was attempted murder," he later stated. "It was like a crazed maniac procedure." Dr. Kirby repaired what he could, but the damage was permanent. Jeff left the hospital partially paralyzed, with only one functioning vocal cord and nerve damage in his arm. He could only eat small bites of food at a time, and his quality of life was forever changed. Robin, furious and desperate for justice, went to the police to press charges. However, the officers she spoke with told her they didn't have the resources to pursue criminal charges against a doctor. Robin returned to Dr. Kirby for advice. Together, they drafted a detailed statement to the Texas Medical Board, outlining Duntsch's incompetence and the catastrophic outcomes of his surgeries. Meanwhile, Kirby and another concerned surgeon, Dr. Robert Henderson, continued sounding the alarm. But the final straw came in May 2013 when both doctors received an email invitation to a Meet the New Specialist dinner at University General Hospital. To their disbelief, the dinner was to welcome none other than Dr. Christopher Duntsch as their newest neurosurgeon. Kirby was incensed. This marked Duntsch's third hospital in just 18 months. He immediately called the hospital and, in his own words, raised holy hell. He also followed up with a scathing 6-page letter, warning the hospital of the danger they were bringing into their operating rooms. In the letter, Kirby pulled no punches. "Let me be blunt. Christopher Duntsch, Texas Medical Board license number N81183, is an impaired physician, a sociopath, and a danger to anyone he operates on. He must be stopped." Kirby detailed Duntsch's catastrophic surgical record, calling him a clear and present threat to public safety. He made it clear the hospital had two options. They could take immediate action and address the situation, or he would contact every major media outlet in Texas to expose Duntsch's horrifying track record. As word of Duntsch's botched surgeries and the devastating outcomes spread through the medical community, the public began to take notice. An article was published online, dubbing Duntsch Dr. Death. The piece quoted Kirby's findings and exposed Duntsch's incompetence to a broader audience. Furious at the negative press, Duntsch himself responded in the comments section, issuing veiled threats against Kirby if he continued speaking out. But by now, the damage to Duntsch's reputation was irreversible. Finally, in June 2013, after mounting pressure from the medical community and the public, the Texas Medical Board took action. Christopher Duntsch's medical license was suspended, and he was officially ordered to cease all operations.
A Plano neurosurgeon has his license suspended after the medical board says his negligence resulted in at least 2 patient deaths. Patients tried to get their medical records from Dr. Christopher Duntsch's office today, but they were turned away.
Yeah, well, Clarice, those frustrated patients were told by somebody on Dr. Duntsch's staff to show up here at his office between 4 and 5 o'clock this afternoon to pick up those medical records. Well, those patients showed up, but as you mentioned, they didn't walk away with anything. And so far, we know that 2 lawsuits have been filed and at least 3 more are on the way.
Carol McMillan.
out of luck at Dr. Duntsch's office at the Texas Neurological Institute in Plano. Dr. Duntsch, seen here on Facebook, was scheduled to perform surgery on her tomorrow. On Wednesday, the Texas Medical Board issued a temporary suspension order of Duntsch's license because of imminent peril to public health and cited impairment by drugs or alcohol. Mary Eford claims in her lawsuit she has permanent nerve damage because of Dr. Duntsch's negligence.
Despite being on the maximum amount of narcotics, that she prayed to God to take her every single day. She cried every single day.
54-year-old Kelly Martin, mother of two and wife of a Garland police officer, died from massive bleeding and is patient number 2 cited in the suspension order. Duntsch has had surgical privileges at several North Texas hospitals, but most recently had them revoked at University General Hospital in Dallas.
A temporary suspension really doesn't refer to any specific time frame. It's more of a move that is done fairly quickly by the board when they feel that there is some sort of imminent threat posed by a doctor. I was told that the doctor will have a chance at some point to defend himself before the board, but that would likely happen over a series of hearings. It could take several weeks or even longer. Clarice?
Natalie Solis live tonight in Plano. Thank you.
It had taken years, multiple patient deaths, and countless others left with permanent injuries, but Dr. Death was finally stopped, at least for now. Duntsch wouldn't go down without a fight, though. Through his lawyer, he filed an appeal and claimed he didn't have the time to drink or do drugs, even if he wanted to. He painted himself as a hard-working, dedicated surgeon, and even threatened Dr. Kirby with a lawsuit for slander. In his appeal, Duntsch asserted that he was the victim of a conspiracy, a plot by hospitals and others in the medical field to sabotage his career for financial gain. When the Texas Medical Board was questioned about why it had taken so long to suspend his license, their response was cautious. "It's not uncommon for complications to occur in neurosurgery," the board's head said. "None of us rush to judgment. That's not fair, and in the long run, it can come back to be correct." They further explained that revoking a physician's license requires establishing a clear and consistent pattern of patient injuries, something that takes time to prove. It wasn't until June 2013 that Duntsch's license was officially suspended after those patterns could no longer be denied. When Duntsch was confronted about his disastrous surgeries and the comments from other doctors comparing him to a serial killer, his response was indifferent. "I'll deal with that in court when the time comes," he said. Duntsch also doubled down on his claim that he planned to return to practicing medicine someday. For Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby, this wasn't enough. Suspending Duntsch's license left the possibility that he could one day find his way back into an operating room. That thought was unbearable. The two doctors, joined by another colleague, went directly to the Dallas District Attorney's office to argue that Duntsch wasn't just an incompetent surgeon, he was a criminal. They secured a meeting, but the wheels of justice moved painfully slow, and no action was immediately taken. Finally, in December 2013, nearly 2 years after Kelly Martin's death, the Texas Medical Board permanently revoked Duntsch's medical license. Despite his once lucrative career, Duntsch's life was in complete financial ruin. He filed for bankruptcy, owing over $1 million, and left Texas to move in with his parents in Colorado. His personal life fell apart as well. His relationship with his girlfriend Wendy appeared to end, though he continued traveling back and forth to see his 2 young sons. But Duntsch's problems didn't stop there. Just a month after relocating, police pulled him over for driving on the wrong side of the road with 2 flat tires. When they approached his car, the officers immediately smelled alcohol, and the floor was littered with empty bottles. He was arrested for a DUI and later ordered to attend rehab. In March 2014, Duntsch was involved in another bizarre incident. Police were called to a Dallas bank after witnesses reported a man with blood on his hands and face banging on the doors and trying to get inside. That man was Duntsch. He was wearing scrubs and rambling incoherently about his family being in danger. Officers took him to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. Later that same year, Duntsch made headlines again, this time for shoplifting. After receiving money from his father, he was caught at a Walmart in Dallas attempting to steal nearly $1,000 worth of items, including sunglasses, watches, cologne, and computer equipment. He bagged the items to hide them, changed into new clothes in the dressing room, and then tried to walk out without paying. Security stopped him, and he was promptly arrested. Meanwhile, the lawsuits against Baylor Plano began to mount. Former patients, including Ken Fennell, Lee Passmore, Mary Eford, and Barry Morgoloff, were filing claims, and Baylor Plano found itself under fire. The hospital issued a statement calling the accusations misleading and insisting they had never knowingly allowed anyone to compromise patient care. However, public sentiment was turning against them. One patient, Jeff Glidewell, still grappling with the permanent damage caused by Duntsch, refused to give up in his fight for justice. Determined to hold the disgraced surgeon accountable, he contacted a judge and shared everything he knew. This effort finally caught the attention of someone who would change everything. Assistant District Attorney Michelle Schugert. When Schugert first reviewed the case, she was stunned. She had never seen a case like this in her 13 years with the Dallas DA's office. Prosecuting a doctor for what happened inside an operating room was unprecedented, not just for her office, but seemingly across the country. This wasn't just a malpractice case. It was something much darker, and Schugert was determined to see it through. The case of Christopher Duntsch would soon become a legal battle like no other, one that would set a precedent for holding dangerous medical professionals accountable in ways that had never been done before. As Assistant District Attorney Michelle Schugert began digging into the case against Christopher Duntsch, and what she uncovered was staggering. There was an overwhelming amount of evidence against him: botched surgeries, patient deaths, and allegations of drug abuse. Determined to build the strongest case possible, she issued over 800 subpoenas and personally interviewed more than 100 people. In July 2015, 46-year-old Christopher Duntsch was officially arrested and charged with 5 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of injury to an elderly person, Mary Eford. He was also accused of maiming 3 patients and causing the deaths of at least 2 others.
Tonight with a North Texas doctor charged for what happened in his operating room during surgery. Dr. Christopher Duntsch is a neurosurgeon and now faces charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, his scalpel. Duntsch is accused of butchering patients and botching surgeries of 5 Dallas area patients who either died or are now scarred for life. News 8's Brett Shipp was among the first to expose these allegations, and you're joining us with the latest.
That's right, Shelley. We first revealed the allegations against Dr. Duntsch in 2013 of case after case of botched surgeries, of alleged drug abuse and reckless indifference toward his patients who will now try to help put him behind bars. Victims and their attorneys say Duntsch was building a resume of alleged botched surgeries, of paralyzed patients, and in 2 cases, death. While Duntsch was operating on Lee Passmore of Frisco, an assisting surgeon had to intervene. Jim Gerards is Passmore's attorney.
Dr. Duntsch had to be physically restrained by the surgeon that was operating with him because that second surgeon recognized that Duntsch was doing things that were not explainable, that were extremely dangerous.
Other patients have similar stories. Duntsch's former roommate, Jerry Summers, will never walk again.
Hospital staff knew that Dr. Duntsch had a gallon jug of vodka under his desk, that a baggie of white powder had been found in his bathroom.
Duntsch remains behind bars tonight on $600,000 bond.
Now behind bars, Duntsch remained defiant. His bond was set at $600,000, and he continued to deny all allegations, calling them baseless.
It's easy defendable. None of these petitions, even for these people, they never went forward. They never litigated and never deposed, never went to trial. I have nothing to hide.
The prosecution saw things differently. In Texas, a charge of injury to an elderly person carries a potential life sentence. With only 4 months left before the statute of limitations ran out, they knew this was their best chance to ensure Duntsch never operated again. If they could secure a conviction, it would result in a longer sentence than any of the other charges. One attorney explained why Duntsch had evaded consequences for so long. It's just not worth an attorney's time and energy to take on a malpractice case like this. The outcome, unfortunately, wouldn't be worth it. The prosecution understood that this case was a legal challenge, but their goal was clear: to ensure Christopher Duntsch would never be able to practice medicine again. To their relief, they secured the crucial criminal charge in the maiming of Mary Eford, and this would be the case that went to trial.
Former neurosurgeon who was once a rising star in his medical field is now in jail on felony charges. Fox 4's Natalie Solis tells us how the malpractice claims against him became a criminal investigation.
Christopher Duntsch on Facebook when he had a thriving medical practice. And Duntsch Tuesday, just a few years later, booked into the Dallas County Jail. James Gerards represents one of Duntsch's former patients who sued the former neurosurgeon in civil court after a botched surgery.
It is so rare for a district attorney to prosecute a physician.
Dallas police picked him up Tuesday afternoon on the assault charges near a Richardson motel.
Typically, when a physician is targeted for a criminal prosecution, the industry rallies around that physician. For that reason, it's a real gut check for a district attorney to indict a physician for something that he was doing professionally.
But Duntsch stands out.
This one is so egregious that the information just couldn't be controlled.
Well, since 2013, Duntsch has been back and forth between Dallas and Colorado, where he was put on probation for DWI. But it appears Duntsch does not have legal representation so far for these latest charges. Now, we did put in a request to do a jailhouse interview to get his side of the story. We have not gotten a response.
Well, we're hearing this trial could last several weeks. It actually presents a lot of interesting legal questions. Can a botched surgery rise to the level, be more than just malpractice? Can it rise to the level of a criminal act? And that's something this jury will have to answer.
Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Christopher Duntsch chose not to testify in his own defense. His legal team knew that putting him on the stand would likely do more harm than good. His arrogance, lack of remorse, and history of erratic behavior could easily turn the jury against him. But while the case officially centered on the tragic maiming of Mary Eford, the prosecution was determined to paint a full picture of his negligence, recklessness, and the devastating impact he had on his patients. They called an extensive list of witnesses to the stand, each one offering damning testimony. Doctors Randall Kirby and Robert Henderson, the two surgeons who had fought tirelessly to stop him from ever operating again, took their place in front of the jury. They recounted their first-hand experiences of witnessing Duntsch's horrifying incompetence in the operating room, the trail of destruction he left behind, and their desperate attempts to warn hospitals before he could hurt anyone else. Jerry Summers, Duntsch's former best friend, who had gone into surgery expecting relief from back pain but woke up paralyzed from the neck down, was unable to attend in person. Instead, he provided testimony via a video link from his home, now confined to a motorized wheelchair, requiring around-the-clock care for the rest of his life. Then came Mary Eford herself, the woman whose case had finally brought Duntsch to trial. Despite her physical limitations and the unimaginable pain she still endured, she sat before the courtroom, determined to speak out against the man who had stolen her independence. As the prosecution displayed images of her post-surgical scars, Mary described the agony she felt when she awoke from the botched procedure. "What are we looking at here?" the prosecutor asked, pointing to the images. "My back," Mary said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "The scar on my back. I couldn't move my feet or my legs, and I just knew something was wrong. I'd never felt pain like that before. It was a 10+, and I remember thinking, he will never touch me again." But Mary was far from the only one left shattered in the wake of Christopher Duntsch's reign of terror in the operating room. The prosecution revealed that up to 15 of his patients had suffered severe, life-altering complications, though they knew the actual number was likely much higher. Jeff Cheney had gone into surgery expecting relief from his back pain, but woke up to discover that Duntsch had mistakenly removed part of his spinal cord. The error left him permanently paralyzed on the entire right side of his body. Jackie Troy, another one of Duntsch's victims, had to face the horrifying reality that she could no longer speak. Duntsch had paralyzed her vocal cords, stealing her voice forever. Philip Mayfield, who had trusted Duntsch to help him, was left paralyzed from the neck down. His wife would later say that Duntsch not only destroyed Philip's body, but also broke his spirit, turning a vibrant, strong man into someone who struggled daily just to find a reason to keep going. Marshall Muse, once a healthy and active man, spiraled into opioid addiction after becoming reliant on painkillers to cope with the excruciating agony caused by Duntsch's botched surgery. His life was never the same. And then there was Pam Trusty. Unlike so many of Duntsch's other victims, she felt lucky, because against all odds, she had survived. But that survival came at a cost. The pain, the trauma, and the knowledge that she had been just another name on his growing list of ruined lives would stay with her forever. Yet, despite all of this, Duntsch's defense team desperately clung to the argument that he was not a criminal, but merely a bad surgeon. They insisted that his catastrophic mistakes were not the result of malice or intent, but simple incompetence. In their words, he was just a man who had failed at his profession. A lazy, unskilled doctor who should have never been allowed near a scalpel, but not someone who belonged behind bars. But the prosecution refused to let that narrative take hold. They had spent years building this case, gathering evidence, and collecting testimony from those whose lives had been destroyed by Duntsch's recklessness. They knew this wasn't just about malpractice. This was about a man who had knowingly and repeatedly placed patients in harm's way, disregarding every warning sign, dismissing concerns from colleagues, and ignoring the suffering he caused. To them, this was not just a case of negligence, it was a case of intentional harm. And they were determined to make sure that Christopher Duntsch never had the opportunity to hurt another person again.
The jury in the Dr. Christopher Duntsch case will hear closing statements tomorrow. Defense attorneys sought to portray him as an inexperienced, poorly trained surgeon.
Is it fair for Christopher Duntsch, who was enabled to do these surgeries, who couldn't have done it without the help of all of these big hospitals, all these other doctors, is it right for him to go away, to be thrown away, when all of them profited? All of them have blood on their hands.
The only way that this happens is that the entire system fails the patients. Again, there are multiple things that have to occur in order for us to be here.
The carnage he caused was not a mistake or an accident.
He did virtually everything wrong. So to be able to do that much wrong, I felt that he must have known at some point in time how to do it right. It was that egregious.
Did he follow the Hippocratic Oath?
Its major tenet, first do no harm, he certainly didn't.
Dr. Robert Henderson testified he was called in to try to correct Duntsch's surgery, calling Eford's case an atrocity and questioned Duntsch's qualifications.
I became concerned whether or not he was a physician and was a surgeon.
Duntsch's attorneys agree he made mistakes. They just say prosecutors can't prove it was knowing, reckless, or intentional.
Even Duntsch's own lead attorney admitted, you had people in walkers, people on crutches, people who could barely move. You had families who lost loved ones. Before we even got to Mary, it was clear things had spiraled out of control. So why didn't he stop? Michelle Schugert, the lead prosecutor, posed that very question. Was it greed? Was it because he owed so much money? Neurosurgeons make big money, and he wanted to live that high life. But the real reason? He had no conscience. He didn't care about the devastation he left behind. Despite everything, Duntsch remained eerily composed in court. His own defense attorney later admitted that Duntsch genuinely believed he was doing a good job. It wasn't until expert witnesses broke down his surgical disasters that the realization of what he had done seemed to hit him. One expert pointed at a video playing in the courtroom, highlighting the extent of the damage Duntsch had inflicted. This provides no stability whatsoever. Bone fragments are scattered across the exposed dura, right here on the left side. The jury took just 4 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. In July 2016, Christopher Duntsch was found guilty of intentionally and knowingly causing serious bodily harm to an elderly individual, Mary Efford. As the sentencing phase began, his family pleaded for leniency. They described a once bright, caring little boy, someone who nursed sick birds back to health and had a deep love for dogs. His father, Dr Duntsch, acknowledged his son's mistakes, but insisted that everything he did came from a place of wanting to help people.
He has nothing. He's lost everything. He doesn't have his family. He doesn't have his career. He doesn't have his companies. He doesn't have his medical license. And I think what happened is that as things began to fall apart, the only thing he knew was to try harder.
Jury, having found the defendant, Christopher Daniel Duntsch, guilty of injury to an elderly individual as charged in the indictment, unanimously assessed his punishment and confinement in the Institutional Division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life.
Finally, in February 2017, Christopher Duntsch was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years.
6 o'clock, a former North Texas doctor learning that he will spend the rest of his life in prison.
And so we're overwhelmed, and this is my daughter, and this is a voice for Kelly, and we're so thankful, and hopefully we can move on with our life.
I'm just so grateful from the bottom of my heart. This will not bring my mother back, but it is some sense of justice.
This is what I wanted. This is what I waited 4.5 years for.
He believed that everyone else was just humans, and this was his playground, and he could build anything, sell anything, ruin anything, and he would not suffer the consequences.
We are so elated about the life sentence that has been handed down in this case today.
There have been other filings from other patients against Duntsch, but we hear from the district attorney's office tonight that they do not plan to seek any criminal charges from those cases at this point. As for Duntsch and his legal team, they did make it clear today that they plan to appeal.
In 2018, Christopher Duntsch filed for an appeal, but his conviction was upheld. He will not be eligible for parole until 2045, when he will be 74 years old. His case set a groundbreaking legal precedent. Duntsch became the first physician in U.S. history to be convicted on criminal charges for malpractice committed in the operating room. Prior to this, medical negligence cases were typically handled in civil court, with victims or their families forced to seek justice through lawsuits. But the extent of Duntsch's harm and the sheer recklessness of his actions demanded more than financial penalties. His actions were criminal, and he was prosecuted as such. His case also ignited a much-needed conversation about the glaring gaps in oversight within the medical system. In June 2023, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed House Bill HB 1998 into law, strengthening the Texas Medical Board's ability to protect patients from dangerous doctors. The bill was introduced after an investigation uncovered that at least 49 doctors were practicing in Texas despite having their medical licenses revoked in other states. Even more shocking, there was no public record of these actions on the Texas Medical Board's physician profile pages, despite laws requiring full transparency. Under the new law, several critical safeguards were put in place. Lying on a medical license application is now a Class A misdemeanor. Doctors who have had their licenses revoked, suspended, or restricted in other states will be permanently barred from practicing in Texas. Fingerprinting and monthly background checks through the National Practitioner Data Bank will now be mandatory for all licensed physicians. This legislation was long overdue. A 2011 report revealed that an alarming 47% of hospitals failed to report doctors whose clinical privileges had been suspended or revoked, allowing them to move from hospital to hospital undetected. Duntsch was a glaring example of how easily a dangerous doctor could slip through the cracks, leaving devastation in his wake. As for the hospitals that enabled him, They continue to face ongoing civil lawsuits for failing to act on clear warning signs. Instead of firing him and launching investigations, they quietly let him resign, ensuring that their reputations remained intact while patients continued to suffer. When questioned, one of the hospitals issued a carefully worded statement. Our primary concern, as always, is with our patients. Out of respect for those affected and due to the privileged nature of certain details, we must continue to limit our comments. There is nothing more important to us than serving our community through high-quality, trusted healthcare. Yet, between May 2011 and June 2013, Duntsch performed 38 surgeries. 32 of his patients suffered life-altering injuries. Many left permanently disabled, in chronic pain, or completely paralyzed. 2 patients died as a direct result of his negligence. Tragically, that death toll would rise to 3. In 2021, Jerry Summers, Duntsch's former best friend and patient, died from an infection related to his botched spinal surgery that had already left him a quadriplegic for nearly a decade. Duntsch's horrifying story soon made national headlines. It became the subject of Dr. Death, a hit podcast that exposed the dark reality of unchecked medical malpractice. In 2021, Peacock released a television adaptation of the case, starring Joshua Jackson as Duntsch and Christian Slater as Dr. Randall Kirby. But the real credit for stopping Duntsch belongs to Dr. Randall Kirby and Dr. Robert Henderson, 2 surgeons who refused to stay silent. They saw what was happening, they saw the lives being destroyed, and they fought relentlessly to make sure he never stepped into an operating room again. One can't help but wonder, if not for their persistence, how many more people would have suffered? How many more families would have been shattered? For the victims, the scars, both physical and emotional, will never fully heal. The families who trusted Duntsch with their loved ones will likely never trust the medical system in the same way again. Kelly Martin's husband Don summed it up best. My whole lifestyle has changed. Everything is different now. I look at life totally differently. Life is too precious, too short. We can't take the little things for granted. We are just trying to make the best of each day. I just have to say that when I first watched Dr. Death, I was in total disbelief. I thought, there's no way this actually happened. Surely it's been exaggerated for TV. But then I watched the documentary, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Every horrifying detail, every botched surgery, every warning sign ignored, it was all real. Rewatching the documentary again while researching this case still left me stunned. How could Duntsch be allowed to operate for so long? How did hospital after hospital fail to stop him? They didn't alert other hospitals, didn't pull him from surgeries, didn't mandate more training, nothing. It's terrifying to think that this wasn't just a failure of one man, but a catastrophic failure of an entire system. And then to hear the statistics about other unlicensed or dangerously incompetent doctors still practicing, it's beyond comprehension. Cases like this really make you think about doing your own research before undergoing surgery. But what do you think? Had you heard about Christopher Duntsch before the TV show? Did you watch Dr. Death? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this case. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support really does mean the world to me, so thank you. Until next time, stay safe out there.